was asking me if I know Tyler Durden.
Greenwich. This is ground zero.
Okay. Be quiet. No, back up. Let me start over. For 6 months, I couldn't sleep. That's all. We used to read pornography. Now it was the Orchard Collection.
No, can't die. Insomniac.
What about narcotics? Not awful.
We never changed. It's all of us here. Almost every exam. Really open ourselves. Mark.
Found freedom. Losing all was freedom.
Christ, I need this! Now get out!
I hadn't slept in 4 days. When you have insomnia, you sleep. And
Feel the healing energy is all around you. Find your power at it.
Look, we're gonna split it, okay? Take the first and third Sunday.
Some films ask you to follow a story. Fight Club asked you to question the person watching it. It looks straight at the habits you barely notice, the frustrations you never say out loud, and the emptiness that can hide behind a life that appears perfectly organized. Then it presses on those weak points until something starts to crack. Welcome back to the Film Box, where we do not stop at what happened. We ask why it happened, why it still matters, and why certain films refuse to leave your mind long after the screen goes black. Today we are opening a film that has been quoted, misunderstood, celebrated, criticized, copied, and debated for decades. Beneath all the noise surrounding it, Fight Club remains something more unsettling than its reputation suggests, because this is not really a film about fighting. That is the first thing we need to understand. The bruises, the basements, the chaos, and the rebellion are only the surface. Underneath them sits a story about loneliness, identity, consumerism, masculinity, self-destruction, and the desperate need to feel real in a world that can make ordinary life feel numb. It is about what happens when dissatisfaction is ignored for too long. It is also about how easily a desire for freedom can become another kind of prison. And that is exactly why Fight Club still feels dangerous. Not because it tells you what to believe, but because it understands how seductive extreme ideas become when they arrive at the right emotional moment. It shows how anger can feel like clarity, how destruction can feel like purpose, and how belonging can become control before anyone realizes the difference. The film does not hand you a comfortable answer. It gives you a mirror and asks whether you still recognize the face looking back. If you have seen Fight Club before, this journey may change the way you remember it. Details that once felt like style may begin to look like confession. Moments that seemed random may reveal themselves as warnings. Jokes may become darker. Silences may become louder. And choices that looked empowering at first may feel completely different when you understand where they lead. We will begin without spoiling its biggest secrets. We will look at how the film was made, why its atmosphere feels aggressive and intimate at the same time, how its visual language pulls you inside a damaged state of mind, and why its ideas became far larger than the movie itself. Fight Club is one of those rare films that almost escaped its own meaning. People took pieces of it and turned them into slogans. They treated its rebellion as instruction. They admired the confidence of its most magnetic figure without always noticing the cost hidden behind that confidence. The film became a symbol for completely opposite interpretations. Some saw liberation, others saw satire. Some saw warning, others saw fantasy. Look closer and you begin to notice that Fight Club is constantly working against the version of itself that seems most obvious. It seduces you, then exposes the seduction. It makes chaos look thrilling, then shows what chaos demands. It builds a fantasy of escape, but places that fantasy inside a mind that cannot be trusted. Here is where the film gets layered. It wants you to feel the attraction before you recognize the trap. That tension is the reason we are here. On the film box, every film is a box. We open it together. Fight Club may be one of the most deceptive boxes ever placed in front of us. Its outside is rough, loud, and confrontational. Inside, it is fragile and deeply human. It is filled with people trying to create meaning because the lives offered to them feel empty. Some search for connection. Others become so lost that they confuse destroying identity with discovering it. This is not a comfortable film to open. It is not meant to be. It wants to get under your skin. It wants to make you laugh at something that should worry you. It wants to make you admire an idea before asking whether that admiration says something uncomfortable about you. It turns alienation into energy, energy into belief, and belief into a machine that becomes impossible to control. But here is what most people miss. The film's greatest strength is not that it understands rebellion. It is that it understands vulnerability. Behind every act of defiance is a fear of being insignificant. Behind every loud declaration is someone terrified of disappearing. The film's anger is real, but the sadness beneath it is even more important. Once you hear it, the entire movie changes. Picture a life built from routines, work, sleep, purchases, small conversations, quiet exhaustion. Nothing appears completely broken, yet nothing feels fully alive. That emotional space is where Fight Club begins, not with power, but with absence, not with freedom, but with a man who no longer knows what part of his life belongs to him. From that emptiness, the film creates a question that becomes more disturbing the longer you sit with it. What happens when someone would rather destroy himself than continue feeling nothing? That question is the doorway. Everything that follows grows from it. The film will challenge the difference between identity and performance. It will ask whether ownership gives us comfort or quietly begins to own us. It will examine the hunger for brotherhood, the appeal of certainty, and the speed with which personal pain can become collective ideology. Most importantly, it will show how someone can spend so long escaping one system that he fails to notice the new system forming around him. So, as we begin, do not focus only on the famous moments. Watch the spaces between them. Listen to the rhythm. Notice what the film celebrates, what it punishes, and what it allows to collapse. Pay attention to how often confidence hides confusion. Pay attention to how often freedom comes with rules. Pay attention to the difference between being awake and merely feeling awake. Fight Club does not want to be passively watched. It wants to be examined. And before we step into its story, its characters, and its secrets, we need to begin with the one element that made the entire film impossible to ignore: the hook buried beneath all the noise, the promise that something inside this ordinary life is about to break open. The most gripping thing about Fight Club is not its violence, its attitude, or even the mystery surrounding its central characters. It is the way the film makes emotional collapse feel like awakening. That is the trap. From the beginning, Fight Club takes a life defined by repetition and shows how easily emptiness can disguise itself as stability. A job can become a cage without ever looking like one. A home can be filled with beautiful objects and still feel uninhabited. A person can move through every expected stage of adulthood and quietly lose the ability to recognize himself. Then something changes. The film introduces a force that appears to offer everything modern life has failed to provide: certainty, brotherhood, purpose, risk, and the feeling of being fully present. Suddenly, pain feels more honest than comfort. Disorder feels more meaningful than routine. The ordinary world begins to look artificial, while a dangerous alternative feels strangely real. And for a while, the film makes that feeling almost impossible to resist. This is where Fight Club becomes more than a story about one unhappy man. It taps into a fear many people carry but rarely admit: the possibility that the life they work so hard to build may not actually belong to them. The routines, ambitions, purchases, and social expectations may have created a complete schedule without creating a complete person. Fight Club understands how powerful that realization can be. It also understands how dangerous it becomes when someone arrives with a simple answer. Look closer at the film's energy. It is funny, fast, rebellious, and confident. It moves like a secret being whispered into your ear. It tells you that the rules surrounding your life are invented. It invites you to imagine what might happen if you stopped obeying them. For a few thrilling moments, destruction begins to look like honesty. But underneath that confidence is a more unsettling question. What if the person offering freedom does not understand freedom at all? What if rebellion becomes another performance? What if escaping one identity only makes room for a harsher one? The film's central seduction is built on the promise that stripping life down will reveal something authentic. Remove the possessions, remove the polite language, remove the fear, remove the need for approval. Beneath all of it, perhaps there is a stronger, clearer version of the self waiting to emerge. That idea has enormous appeal. It suggests that confusion is not permanent. It suggests that numbness can be defeated. It suggests that a person who feels invisible can become part of something powerful. When daily life feels empty, even a destructive purpose can seem preferable to having no purpose at all. Here is what most people miss. Fight Club does not simply show why someone might be drawn toward extremity. It recreates the emotional conditions that make extremity attractive. You are not kept safely outside the experience. The film pulls you inside it. It gives the rebellion rhythm, humor, and style. It makes the alternative world feel alive in a way that the ordinary world does not. That is why the film can be so easily misunderstood. The surface is exciting, the warning is buried deeper. Fight Club knows that dangerous ideas rarely introduce themselves as dangerous. They arrive as relief. They offer language for feelings that previously had no name. They create a community for people who believed they were alone. They transform private frustration into shared purpose. And once that purpose becomes part of someone's identity, questioning it can feel like questioning his entire existence. That emotional mechanism is the film's real hook. Not the fights themselves, but the need that makes the fights meaningful. Not the chaos, but the emptiness that makes chaos feel like an answer. not the rebellion, but the hunger to belong to something larger than the self. The film asks you to consider how far a person might go just to feel seen, how much control he might surrender in exchange for certainty, how quickly a search for authenticity can become obedience to a new set of rules. It also understands that the most persuasive leader is often the one who appears to say what everyone else is afraid to say. Confidence can look like wisdom when the people listening are desperate. A bold voice can turn confusion into momentum before anyone examines where that momentum is heading. Picture the emotional progression. At first, there is boredom, then curiosity, then excitement, then devotion. Each step feels natural because the film never rushes the need underneath it. It shows why someone would want this transformation before asking what the transformation costs. That is what gives the story its power. You can understand the attraction even when you begin to fear the destination. Fight Club is constantly balancing those two feelings. It wants you to lean forward. It also wants you to become suspicious of why you are leaning forward. That is the moment the film starts working on you personally. It asks whether you are responding to the message, the messenger, or the fantasy of becoming someone who no longer feels powerless. Those are not the same thing, and the film's tension grows from the distance between them. The more confident the rebellion becomes, the more important it is to notice what disappears. Individuality begins to blur, questions become uncomfortable, rules appear inside a movement that supposedly rejects rules. The desire to feel alive starts demanding proof. Yet, none of this arrives as a simple moral lesson. Fight Club does not stand outside its own chaos and lecture you. It lets the fantasy breathe. It allows the danger to look beautiful. It makes you feel the pull before revealing the weight. That is why the film remains so difficult to dismiss. Even when you disagree with its conclusions, you may recognize the pain that produced them. Even when its methods become disturbing, the original dissatisfaction still feels real. The film may exaggerate, provoke, and manipulate, but the loneliness at its center is painfully familiar. And that brings us to the next layer of the box. A film this control did not emerge by accident. Its restless camera, aggressive editing, strange humor, unstable atmosphere, and unforgettable performances were all shaped by deliberate creative choices. To understand why Fight Club feels like a thought racing faster than the person thinking it, we need to step behind the lens and examine how this dangerous idea became a movie. The instability of Fight Club begins long before its characters lose control. It was built into the production itself through casting choices, photography, physical design, large-scale construction, and visual effects that place us inside a mind before we properly understand whose mind we have entered. The first fascinating decision was casting three performers whose established screen identities worked against one another. Brad Pitt was already one of Hollywood's most recognizable leading men, which made him perfect for Tyler Durden. Tyler needed to feel less like an ordinary person and more like someone created from fantasies of physical confidence, freedom, beauty, and fearlessness. Pitt's celebrity image becomes part of the character before Tyler even explains himself. The moment he enters the film, he appears to possess everything the narrator believes he lacks. Edward Norton creates the opposite energy. Fincher reportedly favored him after seeing the intelligence, restraint, and underlying volatility he had displayed in earlier performances. Norton can appear harmless while suggesting that something complicated is happening beneath the surface. Helena Bonham Carter was chosen as Marla after Fincher responded to the darker emotional qualities she had shown in The Wings of the Dove. Together, the three leads form a deliberately uneven triangle. Pitt is magnetic, Norton is contained, and Carter is emotionally unpredictable. That casting changes how you experience nearly every conversation. When Tyler speaks, the confidence of the performance can make an extreme idea sound reasonable. When the narrator reacts, Norton's hesitation invites you to see Tyler through the eyes of someone who desperately wants to believe him. Marla then interrupts that relationship. She refuses to behave like either man expects, so her presence creates friction inside their carefully constructed fantasy. The actors are not merely playing three personalities, their screen images represent three different ways of responding to pain. Tyler converts pain into performance. The narrator attempts to hide it inside routine. Marla carries hers openly, using dark humor as both protection and provocation. That is why the casting works before the plot reveals anything important. You understand the emotional hierarchy immediately. One person dominates the room, one observes it, and one destabilizes it. The second production fact is that Fight Club was cinematographer Jeff Cronenweth's first full feature as director of photography. He had previously worked with Fincher in other camera roles, including on Seven and The Game, but this was the project on which Fincher trusted him with the complete visual design. Cronenweth explained that the ordinary sections of the narrator's life were intended to look comparatively bland and realistic. When Tyler enters that life, the photography becomes more heightened, damaged, and hyper-real. The production used heavily desaturated costumes and environments, while Fincher and Cronenweth often embraced the existing natural or practical light found at their locations rather than replacing it with a polished studio glow. Look closer at what this means. The visual world does not simply become darker because the story becomes darker. It becomes more alive. The narrator's conventional existence is keen enough to function, but drained of emotional texture. Offices, airports, hotel rooms, and carefully arranged domestic spaces feel flat because that is how he experiences them. They are not necessarily ugly. They are worse than ugly to him. They are meaningless. Tyler's spaces are decayed, wet, stained, and dangerous, but they possess depth. Shadows have weight. Light appears contaminated. Surfaces reveal age and damage. The environment feels physical enough to touch. The filmmaking therefore encourages the same dangerous attraction that controls the narrator. His stable world looks dead, while Tyler's collapsing world looks alive. Before you consciously accept Tyler's philosophy, the cinematography has already made his reality more visually exciting. Here is where it gets layered. The camera does not merely document seduction, it participates in it. The third fact concerns the damaged faces that gradually become part of the movie's visual language. According to Cronenweth, extensive testing was required because the film used approximately 33 different prosthetic changes across its two male leads. The filmmakers tested makeup, wardrobe, film stocks, exposure processes, practical lighting, and even the finishes used on set walls to ensure that bruises, swelling, cuts, sweat, and grime remain convincing within the harsh photographic style. That level of preparation matters because the physical damage tells a second story. At first, an injury appears to be evidence of experience. A mark on the face becomes proof that someone stepped outside the protected routines of ordinary life. The characters begin to carry their bruises almost like symbols of membership. They are no longer anonymous workers moving quietly through the city. Their bodies display a secret, but the marks accumulate. Faces that initially seem awakened begin to look erased. Individual features become distorted beneath the same swelling, blood, and exhaustion. The damage that was supposed to reveal identity gradually makes everyone resemble everyone else. This is a visual warning hidden in the makeup design. The characters believe pain is stripping away false identities, yet the production shows pain replacing those identities with a uniform. The wounds must also remain believable because Fight Club cannot afford to make its physical confrontations feel clean. The scenes may contain edgy and dark comedy, but the makeup forces the consequences to remain visible afterward. The body remembers what the ideology attempts to romanticize. The fourth production fact is the extraordinary scale used to create a world that often feels claustrophobic. Filming reportedly lasted 138 days around Los Angeles and on studio sets. Fincher exposed more than 500 rolls of film, while production designer Alex McDowell and the art department constructed more than 70 sets. Tyler's collapsing house was divided between a specially built exterior in Wilmington, California, and interior spaces created on a soundstage. Think about that contradiction. A huge production was used to manufacture decay. The house feels abandoned by society, but every leak, broken wall, narrow passage, and unstable surface had to function for actors, cameras, lighting, stunts, and repeated takes. It needed to appear as though it might collapse while remaining controlled enough for Fincher's precise filmmaking. That control is essential to the film's meaning. Tyler presents his environment as liberation from organized society, yet the house itself is an extremely organized cinematic construction. Chaos has been designed down to the smallest detail. The building also operates like a physical version of the narrator's internal condition. From the outside, it appears barely capable of standing. Inside, rooms connect in confusing ways. Water moves where it should not. Electricity feels unreliable. Objects scatter without order. Privacy disappears. Yet the narrator feels more at home there than he did among the perfect objects in his apartment. Production design makes that emotional reversal believable. The apartment represented the person he believed he was supposed to become. The house represents the condition he is actually in. One space hides instability beneath order. The other displays instability everywhere. Finally, consider the opening title sequence, one of the most technically ambitious choices in the film. Visual effects supervisor Kevin Mack and the team at Digital Domain created a roughly 95-second computer-generated journey beginning inside the narrator's fear center. The camera moves through neural structures, tissue, fluid, and skin before revealing the immediate source of his terror. Mack's team used a mathematical branching process known as an L system to help construct organic-looking neural anatomy, combining scientific reference with deliberately nightmarish visual design. It is a remarkable way to open a movie because the first landscape we explore is not a city or a room. It is a thought. Before Fight Club establishes its world, it establishes that everything would be filtered through a nervous system under extreme pressure. The camera begins so deep inside the narrator that objectivity becomes impossible. We do not approach his mind from the outside, we are launched from within it. This detail will hit differently now. The sequence provides a visual instruction for the entire film. Begin with fear. Follow the signal. Watch it travel through a complicated internal system. Then see how that invisible impulse creates visible consequences. The opening also tells you that Fight Club will move wherever the narrator's perception takes it. The camera is not bound by walls, streets, or physical probability. It can enter objects, cross impossible distances, and convert imagination into apparent reality. That freedom is thrilling, but it makes the storytelling unstable. When a camera can go anywhere, you must ask whether you can trust what it shows. Together, these 5 production choices explain why Fight Club feels so complete. The casting turns emotional fantasies into human figures. The cinematography makes danger more attractive than safety. The prosthetic design transforms injuries into an evolving visual argument. The sets create an architecture of internal collapse. The visual effects place the entire experience inside a mind shaped by fear. Nothing is simply decoration. Every technical decision pushes us closer to the narrator's perspective while quietly warning us that his perspective may be changing. Now that we understand how the filmmakers constructed this unstable world, we can finally place the film itself on the table, what it is, where it came from, who stands at its center, and what kind of story is actually hiding beneath its reputation. Fight Club was released in 1999, directed by David Fincher, and adapted from Chuck Palahniuk's 1996 novel of the same name. At its center are Edward Norton as an unnamed narrator, Brad Pitt as Tyler Durden, and Helena Bonham Carter as Marla Singer. Around them, the film builds a psychological drama disguised as a dark comedy, a social satire disguised as a crime story, and a character study disguised as an act of rebellion. That mixture is the reason Fight Club refuses to sit comfortably inside one genre. On the surface, it appears to be about men gathering in secret to test themselves through physical conflict. The title suggests something raw and direct. 2 people enter a room, face one another, and abandon the polite rules of everyday life. But that is only the outer packaging. At its heart, Fight Club is about a man who has become disconnected from his own existence. The narrator has a job, an income, a home, and the freedom to buy the things he believes should make him complete. Nothing about his life appears catastrophic. Yet he moves through it as though he is observing someone else's routine. He is physically present but emotionally absent. That is the condition from which the entire film grows. Fight Club exists because it recognizes that personal collapse does not always begin with one dramatic event. Sometimes it begins quietly. A person continues working, he continues speaking, he continues purchasing, planning, traveling, and performing the habits expected of him. From the outside, life continues normally. Inside, something has already disappeared. The film takes that private emptiness and gives it a voice. It asks what might happen when someone who cannot feel anything meaningful encounters a person who appears to feel everything with absolute intensity. Tyler Durden represents that intensity. He seems fearless where the narrator is anxious. He appears spontaneous where the narrator is controlled. He rejects ownership, status, career ambition, and social approval with the confidence of someone who believes he has discovered the truth behind modern life. Tyler does not merely enter the story as another character. He enters as an answer. That is why his influence becomes so powerful. When someone has lost faith in his own choices, certainty can feel more valuable than wisdom. Tyler speaks as though the confusion of adulthood can be solved by rejecting everything that created it. He turns dissatisfaction into philosophy and pain into proof that life is still happening. Marla Singha brings a different energy into this world. She is not organized, inspirational, or comforting. She exposes the narrator's dishonesty simply by existing near him. She moves through life with a kind of emotional carelessness that both attracts and frightens him. Marla does not offer a perfect solution. She reflects the same loneliness in another form. Where the narrator hides from his pain, Marla performs hers openly. Where Tyler transforms pain into a system, Marla treats it like a dark joke that has lasted too long. The three characters are connected not because they understand one another, but because each is trying to solve a different version of this connection. That is what kind of story this is beneath the famous imagery. It is a story about people trying to become real to themselves. The fighting, the rebellion, and the later expansion of Tyler's ideas all grew from that central need. The film understands that people rarely join extreme movements because they begin with a desire for destruction. They often begin with a desire for recognition. They want to be noticed. They want to belong. They want their frustration to mean something. Fight Club takes those understandable desires and follows them toward a far more disturbing destination. Spoiler free, my verdict is that this is a brilliantly constructed, aggressively stylish, deeply flawed, and deliberately uncomfortable film. It contains extraordinary performances, some of Fincher's most inventive visual storytelling, and ideas that remain worth discussing. It also occasionally becomes so fascinated by its own provocation that the satire risks being mistaken for celebration. That is not a small issue. Fight Club wants to criticize the fantasy it creates, but it creates that fantasy with enormous cinematic power. Tyler is photographed like an icon. His ideas are delivered with rhythm, confidence, and humor. The ordinary world is made to look lifeless beside him. The film expects you to notice the warning underneath the attraction. Not everyone does. This does not automatically make the movie irresponsible, but it does make the experience more complicated. A film cannot completely control which parts of it become slogans. Fight Club became famous partly because the surface was easy to repeat, while the deeper argument required more patience. For that reason, this film is especially rewarding for people who enjoy unreliable perspectives, psychological mysteries, visual symbolism, moral ambiguity, and stories that reveal new meanings after the first watch. It is for you if you like films that do not separate entertainment from discomfort. It is also worth seeing if you are interested in movies about modern identity. Fight Club captures the strange anxiety of reaching adulthood and discovering that the expected rewards do not automatically create purpose. Its world belongs to the end of the 20th century, but its dissatisfaction has not disappeared. The products have changed. The screens have changed. The ways people compare themselves have changed. The hunger underneath them remains familiar. However, this may not connect with you if you need characters who are easy to admire or a message that remains morally clear from beginning to end. The film is intentionally abrasive. Its humor is dark. Its emotional world is cold, masculine, and often hostile. It does not invite you to feel safe. It invites you to enter a damaged perspective and remain there long enough to understand how that damage begins reorganizing reality. That experience can be thrilling, exhausting, or both. Here is the key to watching Fight Club without being trapped by its surface. Do not ask only whether Tyler is right or wrong. Ask why the narrators need Tyler to be right. That question opens far more of the film. The story is not simply testing a philosophy. It is examining the emotional weakness that allows philosophy to become identity. Tyler's ideas matter because they arrive when the narrator no longer trusts his own life. Without that emptiness, Tyler would be only another loud voice. Inside that emptiness, he becomes a revolution. So before we walk through the story itself, we need to remember what is actually being built. This is not a journey from weakness to strength. It is a journey from numbness into sensation, from isolation into belonging, and from personal dissatisfaction into something much larger and more dangerous. And the first time you watch it, you may not realize how early the film begins preparing that transformation. The first time I watched Fight Club, I expected a loud film about rebellion, aggression, and men trying to prove something to one another. That is the version of the movie its reputation prepares you for, but the film gave me something much more unsettling. It gave me exhaustion. Before the story becomes explosive, Fight Club feels drained. The narrator moves through airports, office spaces, hotel rooms, and carefully arranged domestic environments as though every location belongs to the same building. The walls change, but the emotional temperature does not. Everything feels temporary, artificial, and strangely airless. That opening sensation is more important than the violence people remember. The film begins with panic and impossible movement, throwing us through a dark biological landscape before pulling outward into an immediate threat. We arrive in the middle of a crisis without understanding how we got there. It is an aggressive opening, but it does not create excitement in the usual way. It creates disorientation. The camera has already gone somewhere a real camera cannot go. The narrator begins speaking with a calmness that does not match what is happening around him. A dangerous situation is treated almost like an inconvenience. From the first moments, the film quietly tells you that reality and perception are no longer moving at the same speed. Then the story pulls backward. Instead of explaining the danger immediately, it takes us into a life so controlled that the chaos of the opening begins to feel like a future form of relief. That contrast hooked me. The narrator's world is not presented as openly miserable. There is no single villain standing over him. No dramatic tragedy has destroyed his life. He is employed. He travels, he owns things. He understands how the system around him works. Yet he looks completely absent from it. This is where Fight Club becomes uncomfortable in a deeply recognizable way. The narrator is not trapped because someone has physically locked him inside a room. He is trapped because his life has become a collection of decisions that no longer feel like decisions. He has followed a pattern. Now the pattern is following him. The office scenes feel intentionally lifeless. Fluorescent light flattens faces. Conversations sound functional rather than human. People occupy the same rooms without truly connecting. The narrator appears to be performing the role of a normal employee while privately wondering whether the performance will ever become real. Then there are the airports. Few environments express emotional disconnection better than an airport terminal or an anonymous hotel room. You are surrounded by people, movement, announcements, lights, and destinations, yet nothing belongs to you. Every object has been chosen to offend no one and comfort everyone. The result is a space with almost no identity. The narrator's life feels exactly like that, temporarily interchangeable, designed for efficient movement rather than genuine living. The film reinforces this feeling through repetition. Similar flights, similar rooms, similar meals, similar conversations. The narrator begins to seem less like a person traveling through the world and more like an item moving through a distribution system. Even his possessions fail to give him individuality. One of the earliest and most revealing stretches shows how completely he has translated identity into consumption. Furniture, lamps, dishes, and decorative objects are not simply things he owns. They appear to be evidence that he has become the correct kind of adult. He is building a complete image of himself from products. The film does not present this with a simple speech about materialism. It transforms his living space into a catalogue. Information appears around the objects as though his apartment exists inside an advertisement. The scene is funny, visually inventive, and quietly sad. He is not choosing what he likes. He is selecting the version of himself he believes he is supposed to like. That detail made the film difficult to look away from because the satire does not feel distant. Most people understand the temptation to use external choices as proof of internal progress. A better room, a better car, a better device, a better wardrobe. Something that conforms life is moving in the right direction. Fight Club takes that ordinary behavior and pushes it toward an uncomfortable question. What happens when the completed image still feels empty? The narrator cannot sleep, and the insomnia changes the texture of everything around him. Without sleep, time stops behaving normally. Days bleed into nights. Rooms lose their emotional boundaries. Other people seem far away. The narrator explains his condition with dark humor, but the performance carries a deeper sense of desperation. He is not simply tired. He is beginning to disappear inside his own routine. Edward Norton makes this condition believable without turning it into a dramatic display. His voice remains controlled. His face often looks neutral. The exhaustion reveals itself in the distance between what he says and what he seems capable of feeling. That restraint pulled me further into the film. A louder performance would have made the narrator easy to diagnose. Norton keeps him functional enough that the emptiness becomes more disturbing. He could continue like this for years. No one around him appears likely to intervene because he is still completing the tasks expected of him. Then the story moves into spaces built around suffering. The narrator begins entering support groups populated by people facing real illness, grief, and fear. His presence there is dishonest, but the emotional effect is immediate. Surrounded by strangers willing to admit that they are frightened, he finally experiences a kind of release. This part of the opening surprised me. I expected the film to rush toward the famous basement scenes. Instead, it slows down and explores something more vulnerable, a man who cannot express genuine emotion unless he borrows the pain of someone else. The support groups create a strange temporary sanctuary. In ordinary life, the narrator is expected to remain efficient and composed. Here, emotion is not considered a failure. People hold one another, cry openly, and acknowledge that control is limited. For the first time, he sleeps. The relief is real, even though the method is not. That contradiction immediately establishes the film's moral complexity. The narrator is exploiting spaces meant for others, yet his need is genuine. You can understand why he returns while still recognizing that what he is doing is wrong. Fight Club rarely allows one emotion to exist alone. Compassion arrives with discomfort. Humor arrives with sadness. Relief arrives with dishonesty. Then Marla Singer appears. Her arrival changes the atmosphere before she does anything dramatic. The narrator recognizes in her the same deception he has been practicing. She becomes a mirror he did not ask to see. Suddenly, the emotional sanctuary stops working. Marla's presence makes the narrator aware of himself. He can no longer disappear completely into the performance because another performer is standing nearby. Every time he sees her, the lie becomes visible. Helena Bonham Carter brings a chaotic physical energy into these scenes. Marla looks as though she has wandered in from a harsher movie. Her clothes, posture, expression, and voice resist the careful neutrality of the narrator's world. She appears damaged, but she does not attempt to hide it. That is why he reacts so strongly to her. Marla threatens the arrangement that allows him to function. She also possesses a kind of honesty he lacks. She may be deceptive why she enters these spaces, but she does not pretend to be emotionally stable. The narrator does. Within the first 10 minutes, Fight Club has already created a complete psychological environment. We understand the insomnia, the routine, the consumer identity, the borrowed emotion, and the resentment produced by being confronted with one's own hypocrisy. The film has not yet revealed its larger machinery. It does not need to. The emotional engine is already running. What hooked me was not the promise of physical conflict. It was the feeling that the narrator's carefully managed life could not continue much longer. Every scene carries the tension of something being held down with increasing force. You sense that the pressure will escape somewhere. The only question is what form it will take. The atmosphere becomes a mixture of corporate numbness, nocturnal loneliness, grimy comedy, and approaching danger. Even ordinary images feel contaminated. The film's world appears slightly too dark, too green, too metallic, and too awake. Nothing feels rested. That may be the best way to describe the first watch experience. Fight Club feels like a movie that has not slept. Its thoughts move too quickly, its humor arrives at inappropriate moments, its images seem sharpened by exhaustion. And once Tyler Durden begins to occupy the edges of this world, the film's rhythm changes. Something previously trapped inside the narrator's routine begins searching for a way out. That is when the visual language becomes even more important. The first 10 minutes establish the illness. The filmmaking that follows gives that illness movement, texture, color, and form. Fight Club does not simply show us a man losing control. It makes the image itself feel as though control is becoming unstable. David Fincher and cinematographer Jeff Cronenweth bend the film around a visual contradiction. Almost every frame feels carefully planned, yet the world inside those frames appears dirty, restless, and close to collapse. The filmmaking is precise enough to be clinical, but the surfaces are rough enough to feel contaminated. That tension mirrors the narrator perfectly. He presents himself as organized. His voice is calm. His routines are structured. His apartment is arranged with care. Underneath that order, his identity is breaking apart. The camera often moves with an impossible smoothness, especially when the film enters spaces connected to systems, machines, or consumer life. It glides through rooms, passes through walls, travels along physical objects, and reveals environments as though nothing can stop it. These movements create more than visual excitement. They make the world feel manufactured. A human camera operator could not always occupy the positions the film chooses. That impossibility gives certain scenes the feeling of an advertisement, a simulation, or a mind constructing its own version of reality. The camera is not simply observing the narrator's life. It is behaving like his thought process. It moves quickly. It notices strange details. It crosses boundaries without permission. Look closer at the apartment sequence. The narrator's possessions appear with catalog-style labels and descriptions, turning his home into a commercial display. The camera drifts through the space with the confidence of a promotional video. At first, the technique is funny. Then it becomes revealing. The narrator does not experience his home as a private emotional space. He experiences it as a collection of approved choices. The camera therefore photographs the apartment like a product because that is how he has learned to understand it. The room is not where he lives. It is evidence of what he has purchased. When the film moves into Tyler's world, that visual polish does not disappear completely, but it changes purpose. The camera still behaves with confidence, yet the environments become darker, wetter, more textured, and less stable. The house on Paper Street is an essential example. Its walls are stained. Its rooms are crowded. Its floors appear damaged. Water and electricity behave unpredictably. The production design allows almost every surface to suggest neglect. But the house is not photographed as a simple horror location. It feels strangely inviting. Warm, practical lights sometimes appear inside the darkness. Shadows create depth. Objects have history. The building feels inhabited in a way the narrator's apartment never did. This is the moment the film begins using ugliness as seduction. The clean world looked dead. The damaged world looks alive. That visual reversal helps us understand why the narrator becomes attached to Tyler's philosophy. The film does not need to explain repeatedly that Tyler's life feels more authentic. The production design and lighting have already made it feel that way. Color plays a major role in this transformation. The narrator's ordinary environments are dominated by sickly greens, pale blues, dirty yellows, and muted industrial tones. The palette does not feel naturally neutral. It feels chemically neutralized. Office lights flatten skin. Hotel rooms appear interchangeable. Airports seem designed to erase personality. Even daylight often lacks warmth. The result is a world that feels awake but not alive. Tyler's spaces introduce stronger contrast. Blacks become deeper, skin tones become more intense, warm highlights appear against cold shadows. The color does not suddenly become beautiful in a conventional sense, but it becomes emotionally richer. This shift signals sensation. The narrator may be entering more dangerous spaces, but he is also beginning to feel something inside them. Lighting reinforces that idea. Fincher frequently allows faces to remain partly hidden. Light falls unevenly. Backgrounds disappear into darkness. Characters sometimes appear to emerge from shadow rather than enter a room normally. Tyler benefits most from this approach. He is often photographed like an image the narrator is trying to complete. A sharp edge of light catches his face. His body separates clearly from the background. His posture appears larger and more controlled than the people around him. The lighting helps Tyler feel mythic. He is not introduced as an ordinary man with ordinary uncertainty. He appears already formed. The narrator, by contrast, is often absorbed into his environment. Office partitions, doorframes, furniture, and crowds divide or contain him. He seems smaller than the systems surrounding him. Framing repeatedly turns his life into a series of compartments. This is where the visual design becomes psychological. The narrator believes he lacks freedom, so the frame surrounds him with lines, boxes, and controlled architecture. Windows, cubicles, corridors, and doorways suggest that he is always standing inside something designed by someone else. Tyler appears to break those boundaries. He leans into the frame. He crosses rooms freely. He occupies the center with confidence. The contrast makes Tyler look like freedom before we have enough information to question what kind of freedom he represents. Camera angles deepen that effect. The narrator is frequently observed from positions that make him seem passive, isolated, or overwhelmed. Tyler receives angles that strengthen his physical presence. Even when the difference is subtle, it changes the emotional balance between them. Tyler does not merely speak with authority, the camera gives him authority. Editing is just as important. Fight Club moves with the speed of a mind that cannot rest. Scenes sometimes cut before an emotion has settled. Images interrupt one another. Narration continues across locations, connecting moments that should feel separate. That rhythm recreates insomnia. Without sleep, time loses clean divisions. Yesterday, today, work, travel, memory, and imagination begin to blend. The editing reproduces that condition by refusing to let the narrator's life feel stable. Transitions often connect ideas rather than physical movement. A sentence may begin in one room and end in another. A thought about work may carry us into a plane, a support group, or a damaged house. The narrator is not living through a sequence of independent moments. He is trapped inside one continuous mental current. Fincher also uses extremely brief images to suggest that something is entering the narrator's consciousness before he understands it. These flashes are easy to miss. They appear almost too quickly to process. Their purpose is not simply to create a hidden detail game. They make perception feel unreliable. The film is planting visual information beneath conscious awareness. Just as the narrator is suppressing information about himself, you feel that something is wrong before you can explain what it is. Sound and editing work together to make these moments more aggressive. Cuts often land with sharp mechanical noises, impacts, or sudden changes in atmosphere. The soundtrack does not always guide you smoothly from one scene to the next. Sometimes it attacks the transition. This keeps the film from becoming comfortable even during exposition. Information is delivered with movement and pressure. The movie appears impatient with stillness. The Dust Brothers' electronic score strengthens that feeling. Its rhythms are mechanical, distorted, and repetitive, but they also carry momentum. The music sounds like industrial equipment discovering a pulse. That is exactly what the film needs. The narrator's world is built from systems, repetition, machines, offices, and products. The score takes those mechanical qualities and turns them into energy. It converts the sound of modern alienation into the music of rebellion. Yet the music never feels completely human. That detail matters. The supposed awakening is still being powered by machinery. Visual texture also separates Fight Club from cleaner studio films of its era. Grain, smoke, moisture, grime, and underexposure remain present throughout the image. Surfaces do not appear polished for the camera, they look used. This creates physical weight. The basement air feels thick, the house feels damp. Clothes appear worn rather than styled. Skin reflects sweat and exhaustion. The texture keeps the film's ideas attached to bodies. The characters can speak about liberation, identity, and meaning, but their physical condition remains visible. Their philosophies leave marks. Fight scenes are filmed with the same balance of attraction and consequence. The camera gives them speed and intensity, but it does not make every movement elegant. Bodies stumble. Reactions are awkward. The spaces are crowded and poorly lit. The conflict feels immediate rather than heroic. That choice prevents the action from becoming completely abstract. It may be exciting, but it is never clean enough to forget that people are being damaged. Fincher also understands the power of repetition in composition. Groups begin to occupy frames in similar ways. Bodies stand in rows. Faces look forward. Individuals gradually become patterns. At first, the visual order suggests community. Later, it suggests obedience. The same framing that once made the characters look united begins to make them look interchangeable. The film shows a movement losing individuality before the characters admit that it has happened. This is the most important achievement of Fight Club's technique. The style seduces you and warns you at the same time. The camera makes Tyler powerful, but it also makes him suspiciously perfect. The lighting makes his world exciting, but it fills that world with darkness. The editing creates freedom from ordinary time, but it also removes stability. The production design makes decay feel authentic, but it surrounds that authenticity with danger. Every technique carries two meanings. One is the meaning the narrator wants to believe. The other is the meaning the film is quietly preparing you to discover. That is why Fight Club remains so visually effective. Its style is not placed on top of the story. This style is the story's unstable state of mind made visible. And now that we understand how the film controls our perception, we can move into the narrative itself and follow the narrator as that carefully designed instability begins to take over his entire life. The narrator's life begins in a state of slow disappearance. He works for an automobile company, traveling from city to investigate serious accidents and calculate whether recalling a dangerous vehicle would cost more than paying the people affected by it. The job trains him to reduce human suffering into numbers. Every tragedy becomes a financial decision. Every damaged life becomes part of a formula. That cold logic follows him everywhere. Airports blur together. Hotel rooms lose their names. Meals arrive in small containers. Conversations begin and end without leaving a mark. The narrator describes this existence with dry humor, but behind the humor is a person who no longer feels connected to his body, his home, or the passing of time. He cannot sleep. Days begin to overlap until reality feels distant. He visits a doctor and asks for help, but the doctor dismisses his suffering as ordinary exhaustion. When the narrator insists that he is in pain, the doctor directs him toward a support group for men facing a severe medical condition, suggesting that he witness what real suffering looks like. The narrator goes. He does not belong there. He has none of the conditions being discussed. Yet inside that room, surrounded by people who are frightened enough to speak honestly, something breaks open in him. A large, emotionally vulnerable man named Bob holds him during an exercise. The narrator begins to cry. The tears are not tied to one clear event. They appear to come from years of pressure, isolation, and emotional numbness finally finding a place to escape. That night he sleeps. This discovery becomes an addiction. He begins attending different support groups under false identities. One night he sits among people confronting illness. On another, he listens to stories of grief, addiction, or mortality. He borrows the emotional honesty of strangers because he cannot access his own. The arrangement works until Marla Singer arrives. Marla is another tourist in other people's pain. She attends the same groups despite not belonging there, collecting free coffee, warmth, and a place to exist without explanation. The narrator sees immediately that she is pretending because he recognizes his own behavior in her. Her presence ruins the illusion. When Marla is nearby, he cannot forget that he is lying. His tears stop. His insomnia returns. He becomes furious with her, though much of that anger is really directed at himself. They negotiate a division of the support group so that they will not see one another. The agreement creates distance, but Marla remains lodged inside his thoughts. She has become proof that the fragile system holding his life together was never genuine. During a business trip, the narrator meets Tyler Durden. Tyler is everything the narrator is not. He is relaxed, physically confident, unpredictable, and uninterested in social approval. He sells soap, works unusual jobs, and treats the rules of respectable life as suggestions created to keep people obedient. Their first conversation is casual, but Tyler immediately begins challenging the narrator's assumptions. Possessions do not create identity, he argues. The things people believe they own eventually begin controlling them. Security can become dependence. Comfort can become paralysis. The narrator is fascinated. Tyler does not sound confused. He speaks as though he has already escaped every fear that controls the narrator's life. When the narrator returns home, he discovers that his apartment has been destroyed in an explosion. The carefully selected furniture, clothing, dishes, and decorations that represented his adult identity are gone. He stands outside the building with almost nothing. His first instinct is to call Marla, but he cannot bring himself to speak when she answers. Instead, he contacts Tyler. The two meet at a bar. The narrator explains what he has lost, mourning not only the objects but the person those objects allowed him to imagine he had become. Tyler listens, then strips the loss of its comforting meaning. He suggests that pursuing a completed lifestyle has replaced the search for an actual self. The narrator does not immediately accept this, but he has nowhere else to go. Outside the bar, Tyler makes a strange request. He asks the narrator to hit him. The narrator hesitates because the idea seems irrational. Tyler insists that most people move through life without ever understanding physical conflict. They fear pain as an abstract possibility rather than experiencing it as something immediate and survivable. The first strike is awkward. The response is equally clumsy. Then the encounter develops a rhythm. Neither man fights like a trained hero. They stumble, laugh, bleed, and discover an unexpected sense of release. The experience is painful, but it is also direct. There are no office politics, advertisements, performance reviews, or social expectations. For a few minutes, only the body exists. Afterward, the narrator moves into Tyler's decaying house on Paper Street. The building is damp, unreliable, and falling apart. Rainwater leaks through the roof. The electrical system seems dangerous. The rooms carry years of neglect. Yet the narrator feels more weight there than he ever did inside his perfect apartment. The two men continue fighting outside the bar. Other people begin watching. Then someone asks to participate. What began as a private experiment becomes a gathering. The men move into the bar's basement where Tyler establishes a strict set of rules. Members must keep the club secret. They must enter fights one at a time. They must remove distractions and continue until someone cannot continue. The rules create structure around chaos. This detail matters because the people entering the basement do not appear to be violent criminals. They are waiters, office workers, mechanics, clerks, and exhausted men who spend their days being ignored. Inside the club, status disappears temporarily. Job titles have no power. Wealth offers no protection. Physical appearance loses importance once everyone is bruised and sweating beneath the same weak lights. The narrator changes. He arrives at work with visible injuries but carries himself with new confidence. The pain no longer embarrasses him. It reminds him that a secret part of his life exists beyond the office. His boss sees damage. The narrator sees proof that he is awake. Meanwhile, Marla returns to the story in a moment of crisis. She contacts the narrator after taking a dangerous amount of medication. He leaves the phone unanswered, but Tyler picks it up and goes to her. Tyler and Marla begin a volatile relationship. The narrator has them through the walls and becomes increasingly uncomfortable. He is jealous, confused, and resentful. Tyler demands that he never discuss Tyler with Marla, turning the relationship into another private rule. The three characters now occupy the house like parts of an unstable emotional system. Marla wants connection but disguises that need with sarcasm. The narrator wants control but lacks the courage to admit what he feels. Tyler claims to reject attachment while dominating every relationship around him. As the club grows, Tyler's ideas become more severe. He begins taking the narrator through lessons designed to destroy fear and attachment. In one of the most intense moments, Tyler deliberately burns the narrator's hand with a chemical substance used in soap making. The narrator tries to escape mentally. He searches for comforting thoughts and attempts to separate himself from the pain. Tyler refuses to let him look away. He insists that accepting the present moment is the only way through it. The scene captures everything seductive and dangerous about Tyler. He identifies a real weakness. The narrators avoid difficult emotions. He does hide behind routine and fantasy. But Tyler responds by forcing pain onto him and controlling how he is allowed to process it. The lesson speaks about freedom while removing choice. That contradiction will continue growing. Tyler also takes the narrator into a convenience store where they confront a young employee. Tyler creates a terrifying situation, then tells the man that he must pursue the education and career he once wanted. After they leave, Tyler describes the fear as a gift. The employee he believes will now appreciate his life with greater intensity. Again, the logic is seductive from a distance. Tyler wants people to stop postponing their lives, but he believes he has the authority to frighten them into transformation. Other people become objects inside his philosophy. The narrator begins noticing that Tyler's mission is expanding beyond personal awakening. Fight Club spreads to other cities. New members appear without being introduced. Men recognize Tyler and obey him. The movement is no longer centered on two people searching for sensation in a basement. It is becoming organized. Tyler recruits devoted members into the paper street house. Their heads are shaved. Their clothes become similar. Individual names and histories lose importance. They perform physical labor, manufacture soap, and follow instructions without questioning their purpose. The narrator feels pushed aside inside his own home. What once gave him a sense of belonging now seems to operate without him. Tyler calls the new movement Project Mayhem. Its members carry out acts designed to disrupt consumer culture, corporate symbols, and the routines of public life. Some actions are theatrical and darkly comic. Others become increasingly dangerous. The narrator tries to understand the plan, but Tyler gives him little information. This is the moment their relationship changes. At the beginning, Tyler made the narrator feel included in a secret. Now Tyler uses secrecy to control him. The narrator is expected to obey without knowing the destination. When he asks questions, the members repeat rules. When he challenges Tyler, Tyler treats doubt as weakness. The movement that promised to destroy conformity has developed its own uniform hierarchy, language, and unquestionable leader. The narrator can feel the contradiction, but he is emotionally dependent on the world Tyler created. Without the club, he fears returning to the empty life he escaped. Then Tyler disappears. No clear explanation is offered. The narrator wakes to find the house continuing without its leader. Project Mayhem members follow plans that Tyler apparently created in advance, but they refuse to explain those plans. The narrator begins searching. He travels from city to city, following traces of Tyler through bars, basements, and secret clubs. Everywhere he goes, people seem to know more than he does. They recognize him. They treat him with strange respect. They respond to his questions as though he is testing their loyalty. The search becomes increasingly disorienting. The narrator believed Tyler had shown him a hidden world. Now that world appears to have been built around information he was never allowed to possess. He calls Marla, hoping she can explain what is happening. Her response creates a fracture in the reality he has been accepting. The clues that have been scattered through the film begin moving toward one unavoidable point. The missing time, the conflicting relationships, the impossible patterns, and the way strangers react to him are no longer separate mysteries. They are pieces of the same answer. The narrator is forced to confront the possibility that the freedom he discovered was never as simple as it appeared. Tyler may not have entered his life to rescue him from emptiness. Tyler may be the form that emptiness took when it could no longer remain silent. The basement fights were not the final destination. They were the first visible symptom. Project Mayhem is now moving toward an operation larger than any single act of vandalism, and the narrator finally understands that stopping it will require him to challenge not only Tyler's followers but the source of Tyler's power over him. He has spent the entire story trying to escape the person he was. Now he must decide whether he is willing to take responsibility for the person he has become. And this is the moment the box opens completely. What Fight Club does brilliantly is make every major element of filmmaking serve the same unstable emotional experience. The performances, structure, visuals, editing, and sound are not competing for attention. They are all pushing us deeper into the narrator's fractured understanding of himself. Start with Edward Norton. His performance is easy to underestimate because so much of it is built around restraint. The narrator is not introduced as someone visibly collapsing. He continues working, traveling, speaking politely, and completing ordinary tasks. Norton allows the damage to remain hidden behind functionality. That choice makes the character more believable. The narrator looks like someone who could remain unnoticed for years because he still appears capable of operating normally. His expressions are often small. His shoulders carry quiet tension. His voice sounds controlled even when the ideas beneath it become increasingly desperate. One scene that proves Norton's control occurs during the early support group sequences. The narrator enters dishonestly, yet the release he experiences is genuine. Norton shifts from emotional distance into complete vulnerability without turning the moment into a dramatic performance for the camera. The crying feels less like a decision than a physical system finally giving way. What makes the scene powerful is the confusion surrounding that release. The narrator is comforted, but he has achieved comfort by occupying a space that does not belong to him. Norton allows relief, shame, need, and deception to exist at the same time. That complexity becomes the foundation of the entire film. Brad Pitt commands the screen in a completely different way. Tyler Durden moves as though every room already belongs to him. Pitt gives him loose posture, direct eye contact, effortless humor, and the confidence of someone who never pauses to wonder whether he is being judged. That physical freedom is essential. Tyler's ideas would feel much less persuasive if they came from someone visibly uncertain. Pitt makes the philosophy attractive by embodying it. He does not simply argue that fear can be rejected. He appears to live without fear. The bar conversation after the destruction of the apartment captures this perfectly. The narrator is grieving the loss of his possessions and the identity attached to them. Tyler listens with amusement, then begins dismantling the meaning the narrator has assigned to his former life. Pitt never plays the scene like a formal lecture. Tyler appears relaxed. His words arrive naturally. He seems to be pointing out something obvious that the narrator has somehow failed to notice. The casual confidence gives his argument power. Tyler does not force the narrator to admire him. He makes admiration feel inevitable. Helena Bonham Carter gives the film the unpredictability it needs. Marla could easily have been reduced to an eccentric obstacle placed between the two men. Carter prevents that by making her feel emotionally dangerous, wounded, funny, and observant. Marla enters scenes without respecting their expected rhythm. She speaks when the narrator wants silence. She stays when he wants distance. She recognizes discomfort and often pushes directly into it. Her performance is especially effective whenever Marla confronts the narrator's emotional avoidance. She seems confused by his inconsistent behavior, but beneath that confusion is a painful awareness that he is refusing to acknowledge their connection. Carter does not make Marla innocent or traditionally sympathetic. She makes her honest about needing someone. That honesty becomes more human than the elaborate systems the men create to avoid admitting the same need. The three performances work because they create a psychological balance. Norton internalizes, Pitt projects, Carter exposes. Whenever they share the story, the emotional pressure increases because each character threatens the method the others use to survive. The film's story construction is just as impressive. Fight Club is structured so that the first viewing and the second viewing become different experiences. On the first watch, the story feels like an expansion. One person meets another. Their private experiment grows. The club spreads. The movement becomes larger and more dangerous. On another watch, the same structure feels like exposure. Behavior that appeared spontaneous begins to look carefully prepared. Missing information becomes meaningful. Reactions that once seemed strange become completely logical. The film has not simply hidden an answer. It has placed the answer throughout the story and relied on momentum to prevent us from examining it too closely. That is excellent narrative misdirection. The film does not distract us with unrelated information. It distracts us with style, charisma, humor, and emotional need. We accept certain impossible details because the narrator needs to accept them. This makes the structure inseparable from character. The mystery works not because the narrator is unintelligent, but because discovering the truth would force him to confront something he is not emotionally prepared to face. His misunderstanding is a form of protection. The story also expands at the correct emotional pace. Fight Club begins with personal dissatisfaction. It then offers private release, community, ideology, organization, and finally a movement operating beyond individual control. Each stage grows naturally from the previous one. The basement is appealing because the narrator is lonely. The club expands because other men are lonely. Project Mayhem emerges because shared frustration is given a leader, rules, and enmity. The progression feels extreme, but the emotional logic remains clear. That is why the story never feels like it suddenly changes into a different film. The large-scale chaos is already present inside the narrator's first desire to escape himself. Fincher's direction gives this structure extraordinary confidence. The film moves quickly, but it rarely feels careless. Information is planted inside images, transitions, background details, performance choices, and brief interruptions that may not register consciously the first time. Fincher understands that the film must remain entertaining enough to carry the audience past moments that might otherwise reveal too much. Dark humor becomes one of his most effective tools. The narrator explains disturbing experiences with detached wit. Tyler treats destructive behavior like a practical lesson. Project Mayhem members respond to absurd situations with complete seriousness. The humor keeps the film moving, but it also reveals how these characters protect themselves. They turn pain into jokes because directly admitting pain would require vulnerability. Fincher never allows the comedy to erase the sadness entirely. The funniest moments often contain the strongest evidence that something is deeply wrong. The visuals are equally important. One of the film's greatest achievements is its ability to make two opposite worlds emotionally convincing. The narrator's stable life appears empty, while Tyler's unstable world appears rich with texture and energy. The contrast explains the attraction without requiring repeated dialogue. The Paper Street house is ugly, unsafe, and decaying, yet it feels more physical than the narrator's apartment. You can almost sense the damp walls, unreliable floorboards, and stale air. That physicality makes the house feel real. The apartment looks like an image of adulthood. The house feels like a body, damaged, uncomfortable, and alive. The basement scenes are also visually exceptional because they resist conventional heroic staging. The lighting is poor. The walls press inward. The crowd blocks clear views. The fighters do not resemble polished athletes. The camera places us close enough to feel the impact without transforming every encounter into graceful action. This matters because the club is not supposed to produce superheroes, it produces sensation. The direction and cinematography understand the difference. The music and sound design complete the experience. The Dust Brothers score feels assembled from machinery, pressure, repetition, and electronic disturbance. It creates momentum without offering emotional comfort. The music sounds like the narrator's world being broken down and rebuilt from industrial noise. It fits the film's themes perfectly. This is a story about people who feel processed by modern systems, and the score turns the sounds of those systems into rebellious energy. Mechanical rhythms become exciting, but they never become fully warm. Even Liberation carries the sound of a machine. The sound design gives ordinary objects unnatural force. Office equipment, elevators, phones, aircraft interiors, and household spaces contribute to the narrator's sense of overload. Impacts land heavily, but silence can be just as effective. During moments of confrontation, surrounding noise sometimes seems to fall away, forcing attention onto breathing, movement, and physical contact. The body becomes louder than the world. The one scene I find completely unforgettable is the chemical burn sequence. not because of the injury itself, but because it contains the film's entire argument in miniature. Tyler forces the narrator into a painful experience and demands that he remain mentally present. The narrator tries to escape through imagination, comforting memories, and psychological distance. Tyler refuses to allow it. On one level, the scene exposes the narrator's habit of avoiding reality. He does hide from fear. He does attempt to become absent whenever the present feels unbearable. Tyler appears to be teaching acceptance. But look closer. The lesson is delivered through domination. The narrator is not choosing to confront pain. Tyler is deciding what pain he must experience, how he must interpret it, and when he is allowed to escape. Freedom is being taught through control. That contradiction makes the scene unforgettable. Tyler's message contains an element of truth, yet his method reveals the danger beneath his philosophy. Fight Club is at its best whenever it creates this kind of tension. It does not give us false ideas delivered by an obviously false person. It gives us partial truths delivered with dangerous certainty. That is far more powerful. The film works because its strongest elements never simplify the experience. The performances make destructive characters emotionally understandable. The structure hides truth inside perspective. The direction makes satire feel seductive. The visuals turn decay into attraction. The score transforms machinery into rebellion. Everything pulls in two directions. You feel awakened and manipulated, entertained and unsettled, drawn toward the fantasy while becoming increasingly aware of its cost. That is what Fight Club does brilliantly. It does not merely tell us that a dangerous idea can feel appealing. It makes the idea appealing, then asks whether we noticed what happened to us. For all its intelligence and control, Fight Club is not a flawless film. In fact, some of its greatest weaknesses are created by the same qualities that make it powerful. The first issue is that the film's satire can become too attractive for its own good. Fight Club wants to expose the danger of Tyler Durden's worldview. It shows how a philosophy built around rejecting conformity gradually creates a new form of conformity. It reveals how a movement that promises individuality can erase individual thought. It eventually makes the consequences of Tyler's certainty impossible to ignore. But before it delivers that criticism, the film gives Tyler extraordinary charisma. He receives the sharpest lines, the strongest visual framing, the most confident performance, and the most exciting environments. His presence changes the rhythm of the movie. Whenever he appears, the narrator's world becomes more energetic. That is intentional. The audience needs to understand why the narrator follows him. The problem is that the seduction sometimes overwhelms the warning. Many of Tyler's ideas are delivered in memorable, repeatable forms, while the film's criticism of those ideas is spread across structure, consequences, and visual contradictions.